The rain sounded like a clock counting down my nerves. I held the envelope with my name in his slanted hand. "An inheritance," the attorney said, trying to smile for me. My stomach answered with a hollow ache that kept spreading. I opened the letter, expecting relief, maybe reprieve from worry. Instead, my father's voice spilled out like a confession. "If you found this, I ran out of time," it began. I heard his breath in the spaces between words I knew. He wrote about choices and the weight of being a provider, then the line that changed everything. "There's more debt than life." I blinked and tried to read it again, as if misreading would save me. He apologized to my future, which suddenly felt very small. I folded the letter carefully, afraid it might bruise me. I took the letter home and spread the documents out carefully. Old balances, unfamiliar accounts, numbers marching like soldiers I never met. Then I saw my name signed in a curve that wasn't mine. The signature was close, but too smooth, too proud, too practiced. My chest tightened with a sudden hot anger I didn't recognize. "Dad," I whispered, like he might answer from another room. I remembered the months of beeping machines and pill bottles. I remembered the way he said, "Don't worry," whenever I asked. He wanted me to inherit a future, not this ache, I thought. But here I was, holding proof of a betrayal with my name on it. I breathed through it, the way nurses taught me during long nights. I tried to forgive him, then failed, then tried again in waves. "Why didn't you just tell me?" came out smaller than I hoped. I called the lender and tried to make my voice steady. "There's a loan here with my name," I said, "but it's not me." A pause stretched like elastic, then snapped with a rehearsed tone. "We have signed authorization," the representative said, without blinking in her voice. I pictured some stranger's desk holding my father's desperate pen. "I was his caregiver," I said. "He was very sick for months." She said she was sorry, but policy can't feel sorry for anyone. "If you dispute, we need a notarized statement and police report." The words were metal, cold, and unwelcome in my ear. I wrote them down anyway, because I'm good at instructions. When the call ended, the room felt quieter than grief. I pressed my thumb to each signature like I could feel lies. For a second, I wanted to tear it all up and pretend. Then I remembered his letter saying he wanted me free someday. Mrs. Alvarez knocked like she always did, 3 quick taps that cared. "I heard voices," she said, peeking in with worried eyebrows raised. She'd brought soup last month when my father couldn't swallow solids. "He was proud," she said, like pride could explain forged ink. I told her about the loans and the trembling in my hands. She sighed, then looked away like something was heavy to say. "A man came by twice," she said, with papers for him to sign. She remembered the smile he wore that didn't reach his eyes. "I thought it was life insurance," she admitted, "or something to help you." I thanked her and felt the floor tilt under both our feet. She touched my arm and whispered, "He loved you. Sometimes love bends wrong." I nodded, because crying on her shoulder felt like a luxury today. That night, I replayed the last conversation we ever had. His voice was papery, a whisper carrying 1,000 pounds. "I didn't do right by time," he said, smiling like apology. I thought he was talking about years, not money, not me. I told him to rest, to save his breath for tomorrow. He chuckled softly and said, "There might not be one, kiddo." I brushed past it because hope was easier to carry. He reached for my hand and squeezed it like a promise. "Don't be angry with the person I was," he said carefully. I said I could never be angry with him, and lied. He closed his eyes, and the room made its own silence. Now I heard the door we both couldn't open in time. I whispered to the dark, I should have asked for the truth. In the morning, I called my brother for the first time in years. It's me, I said, and silence answered before his breath did. Mark and Dad had a history made of sharp corners and pride. Is he gone? He asked, not hard, just braced for impact. I told him, then told him about the loans with my name. He breathed out a word that sounded broken and familiar at once. He did that to me once, Mark said, voice flat with memory. He talked about a car, a loan, a signature that wasn't his. He forgave then, he said, because Dad promised to fix it fast. But the car was gone by winter, and the promise dissolved quietly. Come meet me, I said, surprising both of us with the invitation. We picked a diner halfway, a place stitched from our teenage years. I hung up and felt anger curl into something sadder, almost tender. Mark looked older, but his smirk still knew me too well. We hugged, like strangers might, then slid into our awkward rhythm. He ordered pancakes and didn't eat them, just cut them slowly. He couldn't handle shame, Mark said, staring at the syrup stains. I told him about the evidence, about the forged arc of my name. He shook his head and laughed a humorless laugh I recognized. He always wanted to be the hero, he said, tapping the table. I countered with the good parts, because there were many good parts. Mark nodded, then softened, then let the anger and love mingle. We can fix this, I said, even though I had no plan yet. He agreed to help, if only to rewrite a chapter we hated. We decided to pull every record we could find by ourselves. When I left, the air felt lighter, like telling the truth breathes. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the history alone anymore. A letter arrived with the kind of language that doesn't pretend kindness. Words like default, collections, and immediate action sat like stones inside me. I called the number and got directed to another, then another. Finally, a woman said, "We can work this out if you cooperate." I thought of my father's hands shaking as he signed my name. "I'm disputing the forgery," I said, keeping my voice measured and calm. She told me to bring documents, evidence, and the courage to wait long lines. Mark agreed to come because long lines are easier together for siblings. At the bank, a clerk read from a script like a lullaby gone wrong. He said their notary had verified the signature with proper procedure at the time. I asked to see the verification, and he stalled and then smiled nervously. Security watched us like we were the problem, which felt familiar somehow. I walked out into air that tasted like old pennies in my mouth. On the sidewalk, I promised my father and myself I'd keep going. Back home, I searched again, because secrets rarely travel alone when hiding. I checked drawers, book spines, the creak in the floor he always avoided. Behind a loose panel, I found a notebook wrapped in tape carefully. It was his handwriting, smaller than usual, like it wished to disappear. Dates, amounts, names, and one phrase repeated, "I will fix this." There were notes about my tuition, our rent, his prescriptions, and a friend. A page made my breath catch. Signature practice. With my name, repeated slowly. In the back, a small voice recorder waited with one old battery inside. I pressed play and listened to him breathe before he spoke slowly. "If you hear this, I failed at timing, not love," he started. He talked about losing a job, a bad investment, and a panic. He thought he could replace it all before I ever noticed anything wrong. "I didn't mean to put your name in the fire," he said softly. I cried and let the recorder keep playing because stopping felt like betrayal too. The name in the notebook led to Eddie Morales, the notary. He worked out of a corner office that smelled like old coffee. He looked at me like I was a ghost he expected eventually. "I know why you're here," he said, voice low and careful and tired. I placed the copied signatures on his desk and didn't sit down. His hands trembled as he reached for a pen he didn't use. "Your father begged me," he said, eyes sliding to the window to avoid me. He'd verified once, maybe twice, because the ID looked right enough then. "He said you'd lose the apartment without it," Eddie whispered apologetically. Shame flooded the room, filling all the spaces we hadn't named yet. He finally met my gaze and asked, "Do you want me to testify?" I nodded, slowly, because forgiveness and accountability can share a table together. He wrote a statement, then folded it like a truce in 2 pieces. With Eddie's statement, I walked into the mediation like a held breath. They asked for proof, for patience, for signatures I didn't remember writing. I laid out everything: the letter, the notebook, the recorded confession tape. The mediator watched me with sympathy hidden behind a professional nod posture. "We can remove certain liabilities," she said, "if fraud is confirmed officially." The lender's attorney countered with numbers like bandages and blades combined together. "Consider a partial settlement," he said, to avoid a longer process entirely. Mark squeezed my shoulder, grounding me when the room swayed slightly inside. I thought of my father learning how to fake my name slowly and perfectly. Then I thought of him teaching me to ride a bike without training. Love and harm can come from the same hand, I realized silently. "I'm not paying for his forgery," I said, "but I'll honor what helped us." We carved out a plan that split the debt like a scar that might heal. When it was over, I exhaled like I'd been underwater for years. I visited my father's grave with 2 letters folded in my pocket. One was his, stained by my fingerprints now. One was mine for him. I stood there longer than I meant to, measuring my breath slowly. "You made me clean up what you couldn't carry," I said quietly. "I loved you through all of it, even when it burned me." I told him about Mark, about Eddie, about the truth finding daylight. I told him that I would pay the part that kept us alive. I told him I would not pay for the lie that stole my name. My voice shook, but it didn't break, and that felt like progress. I tucked my letter into the flowers and stepped back gently and slowly. "You were more than your mistakes," I said, "and so am I too." On the walk back, the world felt a little heavier and kinder together. At home, I made calls I'd avoided for months out of fear. I sold a few things, not the memories, just the weight we carried. The first payment went through, a number small, but honest and mine entirely. I wrote Mark with an invitation for dinner that felt overdue and kind. He sent a thumbs up and a joke about splitting the check equally. I started a spreadsheet and a routine, the unglamorous architecture of recovery. On a whim, I joined a caregiver group and listened without speaking first. They knew the language of exhaustion and love I'd been struggling with alone. I told them my story, and no one flinched or changed seats uncomfortably. A woman squeezed my hand and said, "We get it, we really do." That night, I slept without waiting for a machine to beep anymore. I dreamed my father was young, laughing, and buying me a cheap ice cream. In the morning, I chose truth again, and it felt almost like peace, finally.